Keep learning the Tom Daniel Show.
You're listening to The Tom Daniel Show, and I'm your host, Tom Daniel. Wait, a soprano and a piranha? What? What's the difference between a soprano and a piranha? Oh, okay. We must be talking about opera today. Oh my goodness. That's guaranteed podcast suicide right there. Just the word opera sends people screaming in panic like Godzilla. I'd like to see some research to show just how many podcast shows get canceled right after publishing an episode about opera. Actually, think about it. I'd like to see some research to show if anybody's ever even been dumb enough to do a podcast about opera. Of course, except me. Now, speaking of research, a significant amount of it keeps confirming that opera is the least favorite genre of music by the American public. Year after year, we hate opera more than anything else we hear. Why is that? Opera is so popular everywhere else, but why do we hate it? What specifically is it about opera that intimidates us so much? Most importantly, what can we do about it? Can we learn to crack the code and actually learn to like it? Well, it all starts with understanding. You can't like opera if you don't get opera. Okay, where else can you see a prostitute pick up Jack the Ripper? Or a fake spiritual medium suddenly gets strangled by a real ghost? Or a lady dumb enough to open a bunch of locked doors in a dark dungeon? Or a guy who tries to hide the man that he's just killed under his coat? Or an exorcism that goes horribly sideways and gets everybody else possessed by demons? Or a bride who stabs her groom to death and then casually joins the reception, still holding the knife and covered in his blood? Or a man who casts magic bullets in a haunted forest with the devil? Or a jilted lover who stabs herself to death to make her ex-boyfriend suffer? Yeah, that'll show him. Or a dancer having a make-out session with the severed head of John the Baptist? Or live elephants on stage? Or ghost nuns? That's right, I said ghost nuns. Opera was the ultimate multimedia experience of the day. Up until blockbuster movies of the late 20th century, there was nothing like an opera. Had everything. Had music, of course, poetry, drama, costumes, dancing, artwork, special effects. Nothing else could even come close. Operas were perfection. One of my wife's favorite poets, W.H. Auden, once said that no opera plot can be sensible. So true. An opera is not a documentary. Any opera that makes sense is not going to be any good. Nobody goes to the opera for a dose of realism. Emotional impact is much more important than logic. Radio personality Ed Gardner also said, opera is when a guy gets stabbed in the back, and instead of bleeding, he sings. Now, there are always going to be those goofs who will never get opera and shouldn't even try. Now, if you've ever found yourself watching a Godzilla movie and said, oh, that would never happen in real life, and maybe opera's a little out of reach for you. You shouldn't be surprised to learn that it was the Italians that invented opera, roughly in about the 1600s. It all started with an arts committee in Florence, Italy. They were trying to figure out a way to have serious vocal music that wasn't sacred. See, at that time, all vocal music was either religious or it was just plain silly. I mean, the songs were either about the wine of the Holy Eucharist or the cheap wine for getting drunk on Saturday night. There was really no in-between for vocal music. That's when the Florentine Camerata in Florence, Italy, established a set of guidelines to create vocal music that was serious, yet not sacred. It's probably one of the few productive things to ever come out of a committee. The idea was to take a serious monologue from a play and then set those words to music. One tragic speech plus music equals a serious, secular vocal song. And there you go. The composer didn't even have to write the words, as they were already written. All the composer had to do was create melodies and harmonies to match the meaning and intent of the monologue, and voila! Yeah, that's a lot harder to pull off than you might think, trust me. But they did. Those composers wrote thousands of those little songs. But we're all human beings here. You know how human beings love to overreact. So if you're going to take one page from a play and set it to music, what is the next obvious logical step after that? Right, the whole play. Set the whole script to music. Now you got an opera. According to the Italians, who were the ones to invent it, operas should be based on Greek tragedies as the source material. And there were plenty of those to choose from. And also, according to the Italians, operas should be performed only in Italian. Of course, the Italians are going to nominate their own language as the most beautiful language for singing, but they're not wrong. Italian is incredibly gorgeous for singing. However, that's also one of the main reasons Americans give for not liking opera. They can't understand them. Americans are like, nope, because of the language barrier. But it's understandable. I mean, it's hard to connect if you don't even know what they're singing about. By the way, if you're in a play, you refer to that little book with all your lines as a script. But if you're in an opera, that exact same little book of lines is now called a libretto. Hey, you know the Italians, right? If a composer wants to write an opera, the first step then is to choose the libretto, which means pick a script, and then translate the words to Italian, and then write the music to match the words. Easy peasy, right? Since operas are based on plays, then they're staged in the exact same way as a play, which is called theater performance style. Now that means that all the singers are dressed in costume and they're acting out a role in the play opera. There are costumes, makeup, sets, scenery, props, special effects, just like a play. Operas are composed for a ticket-paying audience, which means that the final judge of success is always the box office. Operas are divided up into acts and scenes, just like a play. And they're usually about 2 hours long, just like a play. Or a movie. That's interesting. The main solo voices of the opera are the soprano, the tenor, and the bass. Oh, I'm so sorry, altos. The altos do get to sing in the opera, but they just never get to be the star. Altos are just the eternal middle child of the music world, always overlooked and left out. Oh. Now, since operas are tragedies, they involve some pretty heavy-duty adult themes and situations. Therefore, it's a bad idea to take kids to the opera. Now, I know all the blue-haired old ladies trying to promote the arts would tell you to expose children to the opera, but I'm telling you, don't do it. Rape, murder, infidelity, suicide, and incest are some of the top themes in most operas. And if you take a kid, you're going to have a lot of explaining to do. I've seen operas where there was no way to even keep up with the body count. And by the end of most operas, there aren't many main characters left standing. Operas are accompanied by a small orchestra that usually sits in a hole in the floor in front of the stage, which is called the pit. The conductor is down in the pit with the orchestra, and sometimes the singers lose their bearings on stage and get too close to the front and fall right off into the pit. I've seen it happen. Kind of an unintended inflated body count, I guess. In any opera, you'll find two different types of songs, the recitative and the aria. The recitative comes from the word recite, and it basically means to sound as much like talking as singing. Or you could think of it as talking in kind of a sing-songy way. Since people don't usually talk in melodies, then recitatives don't have very good melodies. And since people don't usually talk in rhythm, then recitatives don't have much of a steady beat. Also, since people don't usually talk in verses and refrains, then recitatives don't have much form or structure, and they're put together with a lot of flexibility. And finally, recitatives are only accompanied by one or two instruments, not the whole orchestra. So what's the point? I mean, why is it even there in the first place? Because the recitative has the plot. The story is in the recitative. But nobody could tolerate 2 hours of that. So every now and then, the story has to stop so that the singers can break out into a gorgeous song. The gorgeous songs of the opera are called the aria. And that's what you bought your ticket to hear, the arias. Nobody ever walked out of an opera whistling recitatives. But those arias reach out and grab you. And they're the exact opposite of everything I just said about a recitative. An aria has a melody. An aria has a steady beat. An aria has a form, usually called da capo form. Capo is the Italian word for head, which means that an aria is structured by going back to the head, or da capo. If you're listening to an aria and it sounds like the singer just started over at the beginning, and that means it's almost over. It ends by going back to the beginning, to the head. Arias are also accompanied by the full orchestra. So if arias are so freaking gorgeous, why aren't operas 2 hours of that? Because there's no plot in the aria. There's no story there. The perfect opera is going to be a blend of recitative and aria. You get a little bit of plot, then a gorgeous song, and then a little bit more plot, and then another gorgeous song. Rinse and repeat, and you got yourself an opera. Now, one of the goofiest things about opera was a fairly distasteful practice encountered in Italy from the 1600s through the 1800s called castrato. A castrato was a male singer that had been purposefully castrated as a little boy before puberty, specifically to prevent his voice from changing so that he could sing with all the power of a male voice and all the range of a female soprano. I am not making this up. You're listening to The Tom Daniels Show. We'll be right back.
What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show.
Welcome back to The Tom Daniels Show, and brava, Demelza, brava, brava. We're not worthy of Mary Mac, the world's most perfect band. Now, we've been talking about trying to get people to like opera. Apparently, my tactics involved going into detail about castrated singers. Yeah, great plan there. Anyway, a lot of operas performed during this time, 1600s to 1800s, contained parts written specifically for the castrato singer. He was a full-grown man with the voice of a woman. It was not some kind of mistaken identity twist to the plot. The castrato role was a young man, a husband, a soldier, etc., but he just happened to have a really high voice. Now, thankfully, the practice was finally outlawed in Italy in 1878. What took them so long? But for many years after that, the surviving castrato singers became targets of ridicule. Out of all the castrato singers still alive after the turn of the 20th century, one of them lived long enough to have his voice recorded. An Italian named Alessandro Moreschi was the only castrato to be recorded. And I'm going to play it for you now, which is in the public domain. You're going to hear him sing an arrangement of Domine Salvum Fac, which is kind of a royal anthem taken from the Catholic Mass, and it'll be accompanied by piano. Now, understand that by this point, Moreschi was in his 50s. So he didn't possess the full power of a younger voice anymore. And also, it was trendy at the turn of the century to sing with kind of a weepy style, so you'll definitely hear that. But here he is in all his historic posterity, recorded on wax cylinder in 1902. think about that, huh? Who ever heard of a guy singing like a girl? I mean, how ridiculous. Who wants to hear a guy that sings like a girl? Well, except for Prince. And, okay, well, except for Smokey Robinson and, okay, Michael Jackson, okay, and Bruno Mars, the Bee Gees, Earth, Wind and Fire, Rush, Led Zeppelin, Charlie Puth, Ed Sheeran, Adam Levine. Okay, maybe we really do like the sound of a guy who sings like a girl. Except none of those guys I just mentioned are castratos. They're all using a fake high voice called falsetto. There's not much power with a falsetto voice, and it's hard to control, but boy, it sure beats getting castrated, I'll bet. Yikes. So now that brings up a little dilemma. What do we do with all those operas written with a castrato singer in the cast? Now, falsetto's no good because it doesn't have enough power to it, and there are definitely no more castrato singers left around to handle the part. So all of those old castrato roles are now handled by girls dressed up as guys. They're officially called pants roles. Remember, it's not some kind of mistaken identity twist to the plot to see a girl dressed up as a guy in an opera. It's just practical casting because it's necessary since there are no guys left who can sing that part. Mozart's generation came along and completely changed the face of opera by writing funny ones. Wow, what a concept. Laughing at an opera. Well, these were called comic operas, and they broke a lot of opera rules. Comic operas were about everyday people instead of mythical legends. And Mozart himself once said, "Who wouldn't rather listen to your hairdresser than Hercules?" I totally agree with that. I mean, my hairdresser's a tattooed heavy metal musician, and he's definitely worth the conversation. Comic operas were not required to be in Italian, meaning they could be in German or even English. Comic operas were cheap, with small casts and simple staging. And instead of being based on Greek tragedy, comic operas were usually based on whatever current literature was grabbing everybody's attention that day, which is a lot like what movies do. All of this set the stage for the golden age of opera, which was the entire 19th century. Opera became a celebration of music as performance art, and it was a huge entertainment spectacle. It was meant to be total sensory overload. In previous eras, great composers like Handel, Haydn, even Mozart, dabbled a bit in opera, but in the 19th century, there were spectacular composers who wrote nothing but opera. There are just too many to name, but you can't go wrong with any opera written by Verdi or Wagner. And by the way, Wagner distinguished himself by writing his own libretti. He didn't adapt someone else's made-up story. He made up his own. Of course, the Italian grand opera was still around in the 19th century, as well as the newer comic opera, but a new player on the stage was called operetta, and it was known for being shorter, wittier, and featuring spoken dialogue in addition to all the singing. Think Gilbert and Sullivan here. By the time of the 20th century, operetta would evolve into musical theater and Broadway. That's where they came from. What about 20th century opera? Yeah, what about it? It was weird. Here's an example. The Russian composer Shostakovich wrote an opera about a barber accidentally cutting off a man's nose, panicking, who wouldn't, and tossing the severed nose into the river. The now noseless man launched a search for his missing nose and finally found it praying in a church as it had inexplicably grown to the size of a person. This giant nose then led the man and the police on a merry chase before finally getting caught and beaten back down to normal size to be reattached. If you asked Monty Python to create an opera, it would not be that ridiculous. Okay, so maybe during this podcast, a miracle occurred, and your curiosity about opera is starting to awaken. So if so, what should you see? I mean, you don't want your first opera to be about a giant nose running away from the police. I'm sure you'd rather start with something outstanding and a little more digestible. The one opera I recommend to everyone that might be considering going is Mozart's Marriage of Figaro, or in Italian, La Noche di Figaro. If you've seen The Shawshank Redemption, you've already heard part of it. Remember the scene where Andy locks himself in the office and blasts an opera record over the prison loudspeakers? Well, that music was from The Marriage of Figaro, and it is an hysterically funny opera. Even though it's in Italian, you won't be lost, trust me. You'll be able to easily follow the action, which includes mistaken identities, near misses, chases, people getting locked in closets, people falling out of windows, people getting tricked into sleeping with their own spouse, a love triangle, and an oversexed brat whose part was written for a castrato but is now a pants roll. Every year, the Metropolitan Opera releases a list of the 10 most popular operas worldwide, and The Marriage of Figaro is always number 1 on the list. It's not even close. It is everybody's favorite opera. So put that one on your bucket list. I mean, what could it hurt? What else would I recommend for beginners? Don Giovanni, or Don Juan, also by Mozart. It's mostly funny, but it does have a pretty dark ending. The Magic Flute by Mozart. That one's in German, and it's kind of like an opera written by someone hallucinating with a high fever at the time. And he was. The Barber of Seville by Rossini. It's a prequel to The Marriage of Figaro, and I guarantee you already know most of the music in there thanks to Bugs Bunny. Rigoletto by Verdi. It contains the single most popular song ever written for any opera, plus you'll cry your eyes out at the end. La Traviata, also by Verdi. Now this is the opera that made Julia Roberts pee in her pants in Pretty Woman. Well, almost. In fact, Pretty Woman is basically an adaptation of La Traviata. Carmen by Bizet. Hey, remember the Gilligan's Island where they staged a musical version of Hamlet? Well, this is the music they used. Carmen. La Bohème by Puccini. The Broadway musical Rent is a direct ripoff of La Bohème, which translates as The Bohemian. The Valkyrie by Wagner. Again, you already know most of the music to that, thanks to Bugs Bunny. You know what? I'll make you an offer. If you have the opportunity to see any opera, but you're just not sure about it, leave it in the comments and I will tell you what to expect. I'll break it down for you. At any time in the future, navigate back to this podcast episode, leave your questions in the comments, and I'll see it. Hey, I got your back. So, to wrap this all up, let me approach opera from the other side now. Instead of describing what people don't like, what is it that they do like about opera? I mean, what is its appeal? I think it's just the sheer scale of it all. Opera is an incredible combination of so many diverse ingredients. I mean, it's a visual feast. It's orally stunning. It's emotionally powerful. It's cathartic. And you can laugh, you can cry, you can be inspired, you can get scared, you can get swept up in these epic love stories, intense dramas, or supernatural thrillers. And opera just hits on so many levels. I think it still is the ultimate multimedia experience. And what is the difference between a soprano and a piranha? Lipstick. Thank you, everybody. This has been the Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening. Keep learning.
Keep listening, keep learning, the Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening, keep learning, the Tom Daniels Show. Take a break from your usual routine and tuning to the Tom Daniels Show. You'll discover the world of melodies and stories. you might not know. Keep listening, keep learning the Tom Daniel Show. Keep listening, keep learning the Tom Daniel Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniel Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniel Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniel Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniel Show. What are you waiting for? The Daniel Show. Keep listening, keep learning the Tom Daniel Show. Keep listening, keep learning the Tom Daniel Show. Take a break from your usual routine and tune in to the Tom Daniel Show. You'll discover the world of melodies and stories that you might not know. Keep listening, keep learning the Tom Daniel Show. Keep listening, keep learning the Tom Daniel Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniel Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniel Show. What are you waiting for?